all of these refocuses and recalibrations of AI investment and whether it's worthwhile, has anything changed for you?
Absolutely not. If anything, the amount of investment that's going to go into the ground is going to accelerate. And in part because what DeepSeek showed us is that, you can start building these models and it doesn't cost that much as long as you have a foundational model to build upon. And therefore, adoption rates should skyrocket. You saw just yesterday, or just this morning, Nebius reported that the usage of their data centers actually skyrocketed post DeepSeek. So clearly there is more demand for something that is cheaper when it's increasing productivity.
Ankur, we're also seeing signaling from Washington that lawmakers, J.D. Vance, President Trump, really trying to support AI infrastructure. And as it relates to tariffs, because chips are now kind of within that discussion, it's intended to encourage domestic production, but that manufacturing is incredibly complex. And you, as a portfolio manager, I'm curious if you find that assumption risky. Could that backfire in a way that does lead to higher prices ultimately for the companies and for consumers?
Yeah, so the thing is, if you look at the cost of a chip relative to the cost of the product, it's in fact a very small percentage of the product. So if you look at NVIDIA's gross margins, the COGS or what is going to TSMC is only 10% of the revenue, if that. So if you take a 25% tariff on the chips, you're only increasing the price by 2.5%, because the fundamental COGS are a lot lower than people think. So is it very risky to tariff chips? I don't think it is in terms of the inflationary effect. I do think that the impact is we really do need to bring more manufacturing onshore. That is non-negotiable, and just for our national security, that's what we need to do.
Ankur, I love that you bring us that breakdown of really what it means from a price perspective with chip tariffs. But bring us there for your expertise on whether you think TSMC is going to start manufacturing more here in the US. Like, there's been ongoing reporting around whether they do a deal with Intel. Many saying that's not going to happen if you've got to push back against foreign ownership of companies, let alone foreign relationships here in the US.
So a little known fact, perhaps, is that Morris Chang, who is the founder of TSMC, is in fact an American citizen, right? So TSMC is a Taiwanese company that was born of an American citizen who moved to Taiwan after studying in the U.S. and working here for a long time. So I would argue, in fact, that it might be kind of an American/Taiwanese company. So the little known fact I wanted to bring up, but. I do think that the Intel-Taiwan semi tie-up is a necessity. And in part because where Intel is today is not a function of this management team or the previous management team. It is a function of some strategic kind of errors that were made 15 years ago that have carried on through the life cycle of Intel. And catching up to where TSMC is I would call a low probability event. And so, for our national security, I do think we have a footprint of fabs in the US. Those are Intel fabs. Should they not be somehow handed to TSM that actually knows how to manufacture it? It solves a lot of problems. It solves the capital intensity that TSM has to put into the ground in the US, which is a big hurdle for them. It solves a national security problem of bringing more capacity to the US. It solves Intel's problem of not quite knowing what to do because they're struggling to catch up. So to me, it feels like a really win-win situation for TSM to actually take ownership of the Intel fabs.
I mean, these are but reports, but would you be buying in on these reports or these potential win-win scenarios?
Look, I think there can be many flavors. It has to suit all parties. Do I think there's some version of this? I think it's logical for it to happen, and therefore, yes. It is really the only solution that we have.
How do you feel about the ecosystem of chip makers? TSMC is a great example of perhaps these plans to bring more plants to the U.S. solves one problem, bringing domestic production here in the U.S., but at the same time, it also increases that concentration in one player. How do you feel about that?
So I would be focused more so on the fact that if you bring it to the U.S., the ecosystem in the U.S. actually gets stronger. One of the biggest problems right now is we don't have the engineers, we don't necessarily have the supply chain, therefore it costs too much as people bring manufacturing into the U.S. And for the first step in this is that we can allow TSM to build a sizable footprint. Intel is about 12% of the world's manufacturing capacity. Why not utilize that footprint to build the U.S. engineering ecosystem, which has slowly deteriorated over the last 3 decades?
Speaking about talent, that's kind of one of the biggest questions. Do we have a pipeline of researchers, both kind of on the manufacturing side, but also for the software? Are you concerned at all about where we are in that landscape compared to China?
Yeah. Look, I think that China is very innovative, but so are we. And over the last, I would say, 2 decades, we have seen a dearth of talent graduating in the more tech fields that are not software, and we have to right that ship. I graduated in material science and engineering, 2 decades ago, and we need to kind of start that engine again, because really we do need to build that in the U.S. So do I worry about it? I think it's an effort that needs to be pushed on.